Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 7 Secrets of Effective Farmers webinar series, Budgeting. We're grateful to have Les Humpal from University of Tennessee Extension joining us as today's instructor. A few housekeeping items. Please leave your microphones on mute and video off during the session. If you like to locate a chat box right now, please type your name and location into the box to help me record attendance. You can use the chat box at any time during the session to submit a question. I am recording the session and I'm going to post it online. So if you like to view it again or share with someone else, please feel free to do so. I will ask you to answer 2 questions at the end of the session to record your feedbacks. If there are no questions at this time, let's dive into today's session, budgeting. Les.
Okay, thank you, Iris. Hello to everyone. My name is Les Humpal, and I work with UT Extension in the area of farm management. I am based in Murray County in the town of Columbia, and we're about 45 minutes south of Nashville, in south central part of the state. I cover 10 counties, and within those counties, the main focus of our operations are mainly cow-calf operators with some row crops in the southern part of my area. And, currently Tennessee, and especially South Central Tennessee, we work a lot with new and beginning farmers. We have many, not only young people moving into the area, but also people more, say, looking for a second career. After they kind of finish their first, they want to kind of get back to the way of the land. Maybe they've experienced some of that from growing up, maybe visiting a grandparents' farm or their parents, and they want to kind of get back to agriculture. So we work with a lot of those people as well. So today's topic is budgeting. And I know this isn't maybe a very exciting topic, but I think it's one that is probably one of the most important within a farming operation. So whether you are a beginning farmer or even on a small scale, for instance, a hobby farm, or on the large full-time operations, budgeting is equally as important. I know last month, Adam Hopkins covered it, I think, in record keeping, talking about how expensive it can be to start an operation, and not knowing those costs can make it difficult. Oftentimes when we're in an occupation like farming or agriculture, it can be very stressful. You have to work around the weather, prices that you receive for your products. Input costs are always changing. It can be very stressful. And one way to kind of alleviate some of that stress is through having better information for your farm operations to put you more in that control of being able to make those decisions on your own and relieve some of that stress. And budgeting is one of those ways that we can do that. And when we talk about budgeting, on a whole farm level, we want to break that down into enterprises. Too often on a farm operation, everything kind of gets put into one heading, so to speak. It all kind of gets determined if you're making a profit or not when you do your Schedule F at the end of the year for your taxes, or maybe an income statement. Now, again, it's important to have those records, but it makes it difficult to analyze your operation without knowing, what is making you money, what is costing you money. So when we talk about an enterprise budget, we'll break it down into different parts. Some other things that we'll cover today is we'll kind of illustrate a budget and their use and the different parts, and as well as how to construct a budget. And then we'll also talk about not only utilizing those budgets, but also we'll be looking at some partial budgets toward the end, and how those can be utilized for your operations. So most specifically, when we're looking at enterprise budget, we're looking at one specific product, or for instance, like wheat or calves, if you're raising vegetables, maybe peas or corn. So most farm operations are going to consist of several of these enterprises. Now, when you have specific enterprises broken down, you're better able to analyze, is raising, say, hay, is that profitable for your operation? Or would you be better off spending that time and resources into expanding pastures for your cattle and buying your hay? So this way, when we have each enterprise broke down, we're able to better to analyze what is making you money, what is not, and how to proceed. Also, when you have a good enterprise budget or budgets, that aids in developing the cash flow. In farming, it's critical to analyze and have a good cash flow statement in place. And this is what we mean by breaking it down per month. What's your inputs for the month, what kind of revenue is coming in, and what is being spent. It greatly aids in planning, especially if you have to have an operating loan, to see where expenses are coming back, when that loan needs to be activated, and how much you may need to borrow. Also, the importance of having that cash flow. Some of the enterprises that we deal with, like a cow-calf operation, it may be a couple of years before you see any revenue coming back to that operation. So you want to make sure that what is borrowed is sufficient, and how best to utilize that over time. So, an enterprise budget's an estimate of the cost and returns associated with the production of a product or products. Each area is a distinct part of the farm. So we want to make sure when we are putting these budgets together that we are crediting the cost of an item, whether it's going to be fuel or fertilizer or feed, to that right category. This way, when we base it on that assumption, we're better able to analyze. We also implement what we call the unit of measurement. So if you have a crop such as corn or soybeans, more of the traditional commodity, we'll utilize an acre of land. On the livestock side, we'll do it by per head. For instance, like a cow-calf operation, we want to make it per cow. What is that cost and revenue per cow? An enterprise budget will help best estimate, the cost and returns. And then also, we can break that down into specific complements of the machinery that you use, the land, the labor, and the technology. With a well-developed and utilized budget, it helps in determining the break-even price and yield. So, what does it cost to produce that acre of corn? And, further breaking it down per bushel. Once you have those break-even prices and yield, it makes marketing that product later on more current, and you're better able to utilize those marketing opportunities when they present themselves. So, we list the inputs and production practices required for each enterprise. As mentioned before, it's a good way to kind of evaluate the efficiency of the enterprise and the farm as a whole. Also, it kind of provides that basis for your total farm plan. So again, it's kind of like each enterprise is separate, but it's used as that basic steps in building that farm plan. As well as when you can do a projection of an enterprise budget. For instance, if you're thinking about expanding your operation or maybe starting to raise pumpkins for extra income. This way, again, if you're applying for credit, for a bank or farm credit, for instance, you'll have a better understanding to present that idea to see if it makes sense and if it's going to be feasible or not in the long run. So enterprise budgets, you can base it on accurate production and financial records. History is the best source of having those accurate production and financial records. However, if you're starting off, that's not the case. You may have to rely on extension budgets, whether it's from the University of Tennessee or Iowa State or Kentucky. University sources have a great place where you can have that resource to find a base budget. One thing to remember too is when we're looking at example budgets, that each enterprise is different. Each operation is different. You can't really compare a purebred, say, cattle operation to a commercial herd. Those inputs and revenue are quite different. So you want to kind of base it on what your goals are and what your cost structure will be. For instance, an example budget would be like Tennessee beef budgets. For one, that can be utilized, and we'll look at those a little later. So when you're looking at the resources that are available to a farm, you want to factor in all those resources when you're planning a budget and a whole farm plan. For instance, the land, equipment, labor, and capital. You want to factor in all those as you're developing these budgets. Time constraints are a big factor. Again, many of the producers that we have here in South Central Tennessee are going to be part-time producers, where they have that full-time job and they have the farm on the side, whether it's going to be 20 acres or a couple hundred acres. Labor sessions are again most important when you come to determining in your budget whether you have time for it to devote fully, or maybe you need to select another enterprise to fully capitalize on that. When we're looking at some of the different systems, whether it be a crop production system, after you identify your resources, if your land will be able to support it, if it's going to be ground that works best for crops or for livestock, you want to identify some of the other areas that you want to really look at crop rotations. You can't plant soybeans every year. You want to kind of break up that rotation to break up the disease and pests that may be involved within that ground. Timing of operations. We'll find that with producers that may have do a lot of farmer markets and their crops coming in at different times. And if they have raising livestock, how does that affect their operation? Will they have time at certain times a year to totally focus on that area? Or machinery inputs and use? What kind of machinery and implements do you have? And will a crop production system be the best use for those? One thing that really want to talk about on the crop production side should also be, including vegetables and fruit, is the storage. Often, our growers can do a great job of raising the produce, say for farmers market, but how do you store it for extended periods of time before you get the top dollar for that? Storage units, cool storage units are also have to be factored in. Lately, especially, with COVID-19, it really kind of brought to the forefront of people that are dealing with farm-raised beef at farmers markets, as far as increasing their production. Now, one consideration you have to take into effect is processing. Not only what is the cost of processing, but other time slots available for that and delivering it to the market. These are costs that sometimes get overlooked when you're developing a budget, but can be significant later on. One good thing to do as far as whether it's going to be a crop production system or livestock is begin with a good checklist. You want to have, this is an example from one of the publications that we work with called Building a Sustainable Business. And it has a checklist as far as all the costs that need to be accounted for. As you can see on the right side there, we list chemicals. We break that down further by herbicide, insecticide, fungicide. When you're looking at machinery, whether it be fuel and repairs, if you're going to be doing any irrigation, if there's a water cost for that, if you're using city water, So all those kind of factors need to be accounted for. Missing just one or two of those can really throw that budget off and make it not as valuable as it needs to be. On the livestock side, the production requirements are as much, if not more, planning than on the crop production. For instance, you have to kind of keep consideration as far as feed and forages. This time of year, if you're raising cattle out on pasture, it has been very good this spring with all the rain that we've had. But it doesn't take long to get to a drought situation. And do you have enough pastures, land to devote to your cattle? And then, what are the factors if you have to buy hay? So those are the type of considerations that need to be thought about as well. Labor needs, we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. When we develop a budget, when I work with a producer, we want to make sure that they get paid. Oftentimes, labor is not included in a budget. It's after you get done with the end of the year, you see how much money that's left over, and that's your take. But we know that your time is valuable, and if you're devoting time to that operation, it should be included in the cost to really determine what the true value is of your inputs. So we kind of look at that as an opportunity cost. If you weren't raising cattle, maybe your time could be used elsewhere to generate revenue. So to estimate a projected cost of revenue and net returns for a single enterprise, we want to make sure, how much will I make on corn or soybeans? So again, comparing the two, whether it's going to be a projection or based on past history, will determine, how many acres are devoted to one or the other. And also, an enterprise budget is a planning tool to test out new ideas. For instance, most of the corn that's produced is GMO corn, but what if you change it to conventional corn? The returns, the yields may not be as high, the input costs will be a little bit lower, but possibly on the revenue side, the price that you sell per bushel will be higher. So again, this is the kind of the way that you can identify which is going to be best or which will be most profitable for your operation. So again, we want to be consistent with the measurement that we use, whether it be crops like an acre of production or livestock per head. We'll also show an example where if you're raising vegetables, maybe for a farmer's market, well, we break it down by square foot or linear foot as a base of measurement. And just remember that, each enterprise budget is kind of the building block of the farm. And as you put those all together, this makes your farm or your whole farm plan. Again, when looking at an enterprise budget, you want to use your own estimates, your own cost and returns. It can be a great disparity between what one producer has versus another, and it can really throw off your projections as you go through it. I'm going to show you an example here of what I mean by some of these different input costs, and how it can vary greatly among different producers. This is a study, and I kind of apologize for how old it is, but it was done by the University of Minnesota back in 1996, 97. So they were looking at different farm operations and what kind of an input cost they would have on, say, raising a bushel of corn. And on the top graph, if you look at the first on the horizontal line, you'll see 200, so representing 200 acres of corn. And as you look, as different producers, they had input costs of anywhere from maybe $1.25 up to $2.50 an acre. So again, each operation is different. Each manager is different. So this is why not relying on what is published or as an example is not the best indicator for your operation. The same thing on the soybean side. As you can see, it ranges in cost of production anywhere from $2, again, this is back in 1996, up to $5 or $6 per bushel. Now, one thing also to kind of keep in mind as when a lot of these studies are done, we call it kind of a benchmark. And the top producers, the one that really are the most profitable, are not necessarily the ones that have the highest yield or do the best job marketing. It really falls back to what the input costs are, how the best they can control those. Whether it's going to be by land cost or rent, so to speak, but also shopping it around for the best value in inputs, whether it's going to be seed, fertilizer, chemicals. The top producers typically are going to be the ones that have the best management of those input costs. On the revenue side, that can be as challenging as well as when you're building a budget or projection as far as, what numbers do you use? It's not going to be consistent throughout the year as far as what you receive for livestock. In this example, this one was put together by Matt Webb, our extension agent in Marshall County, and he looked at the 2018 lamb auction prices in Columbia, Tennessee. In Columbia, we have a small ruminant, a lamb and goat sale, typically twice a month. As you look out through the years, there's some weeks or some months we only may have had one sale, or for maybe it fell on a holiday or what have you. But if you look at the orange bars, would have been the high sale for the day for this 80-pound lambs, and then the blue bar would have been the low. And as you can see throughout the year, you can see there's drastic changes throughout the season. Typically, the Easter, the religious holidays really have the biggest demand, and then after it kind of passes June and moves on through the rest of the year, the prices really drop. So if you look at only one period of time, for instance, like the April 23rd sale, you can see the prices were around $2.20 a pound or $220 a hundredweight. If it was based on that, your projections, that could really throw it off if you were planning on selling in the fall. So again, we've got to look at seasonal indexes and seasonal price changes as we go through our planning process. Again, existing budgets, whether it's through the university systems, are a good starting point. But I would suggest, working with a lender or an accountant or an extension agent or myself, as far as how you can adapt those budgets to your specific situation. As we just kind of learned and showed, that cost can vary widely from one farm to another. And when we look closer at, say, a university budget, a lot of times we'll have assumptions, kind of like the story behind the budget. So we kind of want to learn a little bit more about what goes into making a budget, and through the assumptions that are projected, that can be learned further. As I mentioned, there's a number of different budgets for the same topic. For instance, this case with blueberries, you can see there's a number of them here from Oregon State, Georgia, Mississippi. So there's a number of different budgets that can be utilized. One thing that I will strongly suggest, though, is depending on what part of the country you're in, you want to use budgets that were developed in that region. For instance, if you're producing cattle here in Tennessee, you wouldn't want to use a budget from, say, Montana. They have more of a range cattle out there. It's a different type of system as far as how they raise, and their cost structure is going to be different. So you want to kind of learn use one that's more in your region, especially on the produce side. For instance, berries, or you want to use something that's more in your climate zone. Those be more tailored to it. They'll list what kind of chemicals or fungicides to use. Soil conditions will be a little different. So again, this way the modifications doesn't have to be as severe when you're using an enterprise budget. So again, just some of the parts of a budget. We look at an input cost. We have our cost categories. We have our variable cost, which is the operating cost. Be the fertilizer, the feed, those type of things that get used up as you're raising or producing that item. The fixed costs are going to be the costs that are going to be there whether you raise a product or not. So this can be your taxes, insurance, utilities, so to speak, your overhead costs. Let's not forget about on the machinery that we have. Machinery costs can be kind of difficult to know how to split it into an enterprise budget. We have to factor in not only the fixed costs, but also the variable costs for those, to run that equipment. Oftentimes we'll kind of lump what we do with the machinery into its own category, and then at the end of the year, we'll split it out as a percentage across the different enterprises. I mentioned earlier about owner labor and owner capital. We kind of refer to those as an opportunity cost. And we like to add in that owner labor as well as the capital expenses as well to get the true value of that budget. So some of those key items within that budget, we have the revenue, of course, going to be simply yield times price. And then on the direct costs, what we call the variable, we have a list of seed and fuel, lube, and herbicides. Again, those items that get kind of used up in the production of that item. The indirect costs are going to be more of that overhead, the land charges, the insurance, depreciation as well. So again, when we're looking at a budget, when we're planning, we want to factor in and concentrate on what's most likely to happen. We don't want to have so much as a target or goal. I know when we're doing a whole farm plan or you're kind of developing your business, you do have that goal of what you want to expect or in the long term, but it should be what's most likely to happen, especially on the yield side. Past history will kind of dictate what kind of yield you'll have. If you look at a budget and it says yield that they're using is 200, is that likely in your area? Well, it depends. So again, having those, what's most likely to be achieved or cost are the ones that we'll have to really focus on. So on the revenue side, again, simply the price times yield. Say, if you grow it, you should already know it. However, one thing on the commodity side, determining what prices you can expect in the future, it's a little bit easier for corn, soybeans, cattle, and hogs, because we have a long history of gathering that information. Now, I would say a new item, if you say, for instance, hemp is grown for CBD oil, or what kind of prices that we're going to have, that becomes a little bit more difficult to determine. Now, on some of those variable input costs, simply, the price times quantity used per acre. It says it's a little bit easier to determine. However, it does take work as far as maybe calling around. If you're looking for a certain chemical or for certain fertilizer, prices among vendors or commercial and it can vary greatly. Utilizing the internet can be also another source of finding out what those typical prices are, and also the usage rates. With the livestock budgets, we talked about having like one cow, one hog, so to speak. We do want to break down our time periods within the same time period of 1 year. Now, if you're raising hogs, you're farrowing out. A sow can have a couple litters a year, such as a ewe or a doe. So, however, we don't want to separate those out as their own time periods on each litter or on each kidding. We want to make sure that we can stay within that time period of a year. So we want to factor those costs into that same time period. The same thing that we want to do with machinery and any facilities that have fixed and variable costs, just like you would for crops. You want to have those same type of parameters for machinery, for livestock, as you do with crops as well. One thing that I kind of get asked about quite a bit when you have things separated as an enterprise, whether it be livestock and crops, and if you're growing say corn that you're going to utilize on your livestock operation, how do you price that? The way I look at it as you want to keep this two separate enterprises. For instance, if it costs, say, $3.50 to raise a bushel of corn, but if you were to sell it and you can get $4 a bushel, that's the price you want to use when you dictate that back to the enterprise budget for corn. Now, if you're feeding that to your cattle, you would want to use that input cost of $4 and not that $3.50. So you want to see that full value of the production. Now, one thing, at the end of the year, as far as taxes, that's not a factor because all those costs are going to get lumped together. All the revenue is going to get lumped together. But this way, you'll have a better understanding of what the true value of each enterprise is. Now, second heading here, manure or poultry litter. It's one of those things that kind of you kind of forget about that it is a valued item to use for crop fertilizer. We have a number of different breeder poultry buildings down in central Tennessee. And of course, the poultry litter does have a value. We get it analyzed, we can determine what it is to commercial fertilizer. It could be worth $40, $50, $60 a ton. By having it analyzed, you can see what kind of rates you can put on your field. So that adds value back to that poultry enterprise. Now, as far as crediting the poultry enterprise for that cost, and then on the if you're raising hay or some other crops, you want to just credit that or debit it to the crop side. So we want to make sure that each enterprise does get its full value of production. When we look at delivery cost, I know to clean out for instance, those poultry buildings, there is a cost to that and hauling it away. So, I like to split those charges up. Maybe, half the cost of hauling is credited to the poultry, and the other half will be credited over to the crop side. So again, to kind of break it down further to really determine, what value is coming from where, what those true costs truly are. Earlier, I kind of talked about assumptions on a budgeting basis. I'm just going to move ahead a slide and kind of just show this is an example budget from the University of Tennessee cow-calf operations, and we have it broke down on our Excel budget. We have different tabs as far as herd data, cost of production for pasture and hay ground, purchased hay, supplemental feed, as well as vet med and other costs as well. But as you can see at the top, we broke down per head and also on the herd. But as we kind of back up to the first slide, when we talk about the assumptions, this kind of gives us basic the outline as far as where we kind of get some of our data and what we base it on. And again, this is a great outline when you're building your own budgets for your farm plans. So the herd data that we're using here, just at the top, it's a 50 cow herd with 2 breeding bulls. We expect a 90 cow calf crop. Not all the cows are kept every year, so we have a call-in rate of 16%, and we replaced that 16% are going to be replaced with the heifers that are born on the farm. We have recommendation outline as far as commercial feed that we feed, as well as hay that we use as far as feeding 150 days a year. So we know that we would have to develop or have enough hay to utilize during those winter months. And we also have some outlines here for the veterinary medicines, whether it's the vaccine, what the protocols are as well. So as we kind of move ahead, we'll look at the revenue. We have it broke down per cow, and we do it as a percentage. So, we may sell cows a year, but we've got to spread that revenue among the whole herd. So that's why we'll see $96 per cow gets credited. Our heifer calves, again, we'll keep some back for breed purposes later on, but then the rest that we would sell, and same with the steers. So we have it broke down as an average across the herd. So in this case here, we see a revenue of $622 in this example. And then we break things down as far as those variable expenses. What does it cost to have that pasture per year? As far as fertilization, clipping it, the prorated cost of establishment are also included. Supplemental feed, vet meted, etc. We also have a spot here for that interest. So, the cost that we have here, we have it spread out over 6 months at 6% interest. So that's kind of how we have that come up at $17 here as well. So again, this is just an outline that kind of shows how we have these setups and how you'll be able to utilize that for your own operation. Our fixed expenses, we have separate tabs for livestock and facilities, for also equipment. So those tabs, you'll be able to put your own information in and determine how that's going to come back on your operation. Here I have an example from our friends up at Kentucky for the Center of Crop Diversification. They have a number of really good small produce, or what they call small scale budgets. So they're not based on acres as they are more on a smaller area. For instance, in this example, we're looking at pumpkins that would be sold at a fresh market, and it's based on a 700-foot row. Now, as far as the returns, they have already put in place, but this is where by doing a little research, reaching out to different local farmers markets, you can find out what they're going for in your area, put those prices in, the quantity that you expect off that 700-foot row, and further on the variable cost side. I really like utilizing these established budgets because this way it gives you a heads up or a reminder of what all needs to be included for nothing is missed as far as when we're developing these budgets. Kentucky also puts in the harvesting marketing cost as far as getting rid of that plastic at the end of the year, the containers that may be used to haul and store that produce. They also have below this, I didn't put it on the slide, but also some of those fixed costs factored in as well. So these budgets you'll be able to download from their website, and I would strongly suggest anyone that is more into the farmer's market type of it or planning a small garden to utilize these budgets, not only as determining the cost of production, but also just kind of keep it as a reminder of what products may be needed to establish that enterprise from the beginning to end. Now, when we talk about estimating costs for machinery, buildings, equipment, it gets a little bit more difficult as far as what does it cost to plow a field, or the annual cost to keep up a dairy barn. What kind of portion of the tractor repair should be allocated to the soybean production versus corn production, or even on the livestock. Machinery cost, will show some examples here as far as what can be kind of used and determined as far as helping you better understand and find those costs. Now, I mentioned earlier as far as how we can break down different enterprises. Here we kind of show the beef, strawberries, and if you were raising strawberries for a farmer's market or pick your own, but also on the jam side. And then we have that category in the middle here, This is from like an Excel spreadsheet related to overhead. So we have kind of like farm insurance put in there as far as well as fuel and different repairs for that equipment. So instead of trying to, through the course of the year, every time you have a fuel bill, categorizing it into each enterprise, maybe just waiting to the end of the year and dividing it up at that time will probably be a little bit a simpler way of doing it. So, machinery cost, just kind of get back to that as far as, substantial cost of any operation. Some studies have found it's anywhere from 25 to 40% of the cost of operation. It's difficult to kind of measure, estimate, because you have a lot of the variable cost for fuel, oil, repairs can make a huge difference that kind of pop up. The fixed cost, if you buy that equipment, those payments have to be made. Interest, insurance, taxes, and in housing, as well as depreciation. When on the repair side, how do you estimate that a new tractor versus one that has some years on it? There's some really good studies, or I should say publications from Kansas State, Iowa State have some really good ones as far as determining repair cost. How do you find that when you're doing a projection? Some of the outlines that they'll have is on a certain piece of equipment, say it's a tractor, say 80 horsepower, and factored in the cost. The first year, the repair costs are probably 0 or only a 1% factor rate, while as that tractor ages, maybe a 10-year-old tractor, that percentage will maybe be 5% of that cost, or 5 to 10% of that cost of that piece of equipment. So as they age, the repairs typically go up in price. So this is not only a good way to project the cost of repairs, but also looking at that piece of equipment. What's it going to cost in 10 years for repair? Maybe it's time to trade in and get a new piece of equipment. So there's another way to kind of look at that as well. There's also from Kansas State and also University of Wisconsin, determining equipment rates or custom rates as far as what does it cost to harvest or bush hog or bale hay. Custom rates are a good example as far as making those projections if you don't have that equipment here or haven't done it in the past. Now, one thing with custom rates, there's a wide range of prices that we'll find when these studies are done. So you can use it as a guide, rely on your local extension agent and service to see what kind of price ranges are within your area. One thing that kind of gets factored in, oftentimes listed custom rates are probably underreported. And what I mean by that, as far as if you use a custom rate when you put in a projection together for your own operation with your own equipment, oftentimes what's published is going to be much less than what you can do it for. And the reason for that is if someone's doing custom field work, they may be using that equipment over many hundreds of hours or hundreds of acres. As a independent farmer, your hours of usage or the acres that you cover would be much less. So based on that, the cost per unit or acre will be higher than they are on whether it's a custom rate that is published. So again, it's mainly used as a benchmark, and to get you in that range, but it is a good step forward. Another area that we kind of look at as far as is called prorated. How do you prorating a cost of something that is extended over time? For instance, on hay or pasture, we know that each year especially on pasture ground. If you're going to put some fertilizer down or you're going to be bush hog it, we know what that price is each year. However, a good a pasture or hay ground needs to kind of be established or reestablished over a number of years. And typically that establishment rate, has a lifespan as well. So when we look at, say, a pasture to kind of work up the ground and get it reseeded and fertilizer at the rates that it needs to be, that established cost could be maybe $120 an acre. Now, we don't want to put that cost all into year one for that pasture, and year 2 and 3 not see anything, because that doesn't give us a true cost overall. What we want to do is prorate that. So if we feel that that life on that established pasture is 4 years before it needs to be done again, we just take that $120 divided by 4 for $30 an acre. So that gets added in to the yearly cost or the annual cost of that pasture. Again, this is the way to better understand and look at the true cost over time of whether you have hay or pastures. The same method that we use for if you made a purchase of a storage unit, maybe a place to store a cool storage unit for vegetables. That initial cost would be great. So we don't want to put it in all that cost in 1 year. I mean, it would really throw off the true value of your vegetables, for instance, on the crop side. So we do want to prorate that out over the useful life, whether it's 10 years or 15 years, as we establish the budgets. Allocating the overhead costs. I know we kind of touched on that a little bit before, but as you look at, say, Schedule F tax form, you'll see lines there for, membership dues, insurance, legal fees. And one of the better ways to do that is using that Schedule F to capture all those costs. And once you have that, you can kind of allocate to each individual enterprise, whether you have 5 or 6 enterprises, or another way to say more accurately do that, I would look at the budget of each enterprise. Is one contributing 80% to your operation when it only needs maybe 20. Of course, the 80% would be allocated more than the 20. So it's oftentimes, these costs are missed within the enterprise budgets. But again, they are part of those costs of doing business within each unit. Here's an example of a Schedule F tax form that we kind of just mentioned. I know there's other tax forms that you can use for a farm operation, but this one will be with every farm operation. And in part 1, that's our income that we would have from sales of livestock or produce, or from our dairy operation. We include in any type of other farm payments that we'd have would be a agriculture program, any if you did any custom hire work that you went out and did some work for a neighbor, that would be included, of course, on part 1. And we look down at part 2 here. As you can see, we don't have it broke down by each enterprise, but as a total. We're looking at, chemicals are all put together, depreciation, feed, etc. So, we look at over, I'd say, line 29, 30, 31, especially in these areas where you can kind of see where taxes are just lumped together. Same thing with utilities. So at the end of the year, we can add those up and allocate them to where we need to go. Another thing, as far as when you're developing budgets, kind of looking back at a Schedule F form only tells you a small part of the story as far as the overall financial health of an operation. I think Adam touched on this last month as far as what the balance sheets are also needed to give you that true look at your farm operation as far as if it's making money or losing money. Another thing when you're looking at cost on a Schedule F form, that you want to kind of use an average over a 3 or 5 year average. You want to avoid any accrual adjustments that you may have had or changes in prices on a commodity side. Maybe there's a bump up in price for 1 year that you receive, well above the average. So again, you use those average prices over a period of 3 and 5 years will give you a more accurate forecast going into the future. An income statement is better, say a little bit more accurate than to use, but not all farms have those. When we really get down to it, the main idea is that percentage of Schedule F form to be allocated to each enterprise. Having those accurate enterprise budgets is a way to determine that break-even price in yield. Break-even price, again, is nothing more than taking what that given price is or the cost. If you know your input cost per acre, for instance, say $600 per corn, and you look ahead, what the future market's going to bring, or what you might have it marketed for already, say it's $4, you do know then that break-even yield in this case is going to be 150 bushels an acre. So is that 150 achievable in your area? If that 150 is achievable, and then anything over is going to be allocated more toward that profit side that you'll receive. Now, as far as the price, what you're looking for, simply again, that $608 per acre, and say if your average yield over time was 150 bushels, you know that your break even is $4. With that $4 price, that gives you an opportunity to better market your corn or your crop. Knowing that $4 is that break even. When you see an opportunity in the market of say maybe $4.25, $4.50, in this example, that that's where you will be making a profit on. So maybe that's a good opportunity to market. This can be done, again, same thing with, say, tomatoes at a farmer's market. When you look back at your budgets, if you realize the cost in the pounds per acre or pounds per square feet that you harvest, does that put you in a marketable position? At the farmer's market, if the going rate is say $3 a pound for tomatoes, and it's costing you $5, $6, $7 to raise them, maybe that's not what you need to be raising. Maybe you need to focus on another vegetable or another crop. However, I will caution that too, that often with farmers markets and with a produce vendor, sometimes it's important to have that full assortment in your offering. So even though you may be losing some money on, say, tomatoes, it's important to have. But again, you want to control those costs for it's not beyond what is reasonable to expect. One of the last things I want to kind of touch on here within the whole kind of say family of budgeting is partial budgeting. So this isn't in a case where you have to find out every cost that you have as far as every input cost, and on the revenue side, what the price is going to be and how much you're going to have to sell. This is just kind of breaking it down as far as if you make, think about making a potential change in your operation. For instance, here in the South, we do a lot of stockpiling of fescue grass in the fall. What that means is that we kind of set aside X amount of acres that we don't graze. We let that kind of grow up. And then later on, maybe in November, December, January, we'll turn the cows out there to graze on so we don't have to feed them hay. Another example of doing a partial budget is purchasing a bull with superior genetics. So you'll be making an investment much greater than, say, in the past. Kind of comparing a $5,000 bull to a $2,500 bull in this case. Purchasing hay versus growing hay, and et cetera. whether it's be expanding a cow herd, that can be used on a partial budgeting basis. So what we look at is nothing more than on a partial budget, we look at, is this change to our operation is going to add revenue? And how much revenue is it going to add? Is that change going to reduce expenses? And if so, by how much? So we add those two together, and that's going to be the total credit for our partial budget. We look at any added expenses, and in this case, with stockpiling, what kind of expenses can we see as far as setting aside those acres? And does it reduce our revenue? That way, you'll have your whole total debit. So again, we'll just look at the change in income. If it's going to be a positive, then it's a change that we want to go out and make. If it's going to be a negative, then we may not want to do that change. We may not want to buy that bull or do the stockpiling. So to kind of look at it a little bit further, in this example, we look at our stockpile tall fescue on a 50 cow herd. And if we set aside 25 acres that we wanted to, say, naturally grow for a few months, is this going to be a positive change or not? We look at, is there any added revenue? In this case, all we're talking about is feeding the herd, not really selling anything, so there's no added revenue. And does it reduce our expenses? So based on some of the budgets that we do have and some of the literature that we do have, if we want to reduce our hay feeding by 30 days for 50 head, the cow's going to require around 23 pounds of hay per day times 50. We got that factored in, so we could reduce our hay feeding by 17 tons. And based on $75 a ton, we look at reduced expenses for a credit of $1,284. Now, when we look at added expenses, what else are we going to have to put in that operation to help us achieve this stockpiling goal that we have? And typically, we'll put down extra nitrogen on that ground and keep the cows off of it for 30 or 60 days. So to cover that 25 acres, we maybe put down, say, 60 pounds of nitrogen at 50 cents a pound. And that'd be a cost of $30 an acre, or 25 times 30 is $750. So the next step is, does it reduce our revenue? No, again, in this case, we're not selling anything or we're not adding anything to it. So our cost of $750, against the $1,284, we'll see that the next change is a positive of $534. So this way, we don't have to go through that whole budgeting step. We can use a partial budget to help us make those decisions. So just in summary, when we're looking at it at budgeting, the enterprise budgets are kind of the building block to that whole farm plan. It's very difficult to determine, 6 months from now, a year from now, without doing a budget, whether that farm will be profitable or not, if we're going in the right direction. Having that information in place, again, helps reduce the stress in making those decisions. This way, you can kind of evaluate the efficiency of the different farm enterprises and how they relate going forward. Another to be reminded of is to allocate all those input cost of revenue consistently across the enterprises. Again, I can't stress enough that you want to use your own input and revenue estimates. Prices can vary. Input costs across different farms can vary greatly. So having the cost for your operation will give you the most accurate data to use moving forward. And also, allocating those overhead budgets or overhead costs, again, utilizing Schedule F form and the whole farm budget to get a better perspective. So, I just wanted to reach out and make sure that I know we covered a lot of different information today and topics as far as the enterprise budgets, the input cost, where to where to find this information. But this is where, the extension service, whether myself or Iris or the other managed agents across the state, can work with individuals one-on-one to further develop not only budgets, but also whole farm plans. So this is all I have. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them for you. And I appreciate you watching and being part of this today.
All right, thank you, Les. If you have a question right now, just type in the chat box. And like Les mentioned in the webinar, that this is a lot of information. And I'm sure some of us are like, what is Les talking about? But if you have trouble with financial planning or budgeting, any type of those farm management questions, you can reach out to any of us in the UT Managed program. And I put a link in the chat box if you want to find out who's your managed specialist in your county. Just go to the website and see what we can help with and who you can contact. I don't see any questions so far. I'm gonna launch the feedback, the 2 questions you can help me answer on your screen right now. And next month, we'll have Megan LeFew from Center for Profitable Agriculture joining us to talk about marketing for value-added or niche products. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Iris.
Thank you, Les.